Do you have a favourite poet and author that is an influence?
I bought a book of his yesterday. Gary Snyder is definitely my favourite poet. He was kind of one of the beats, along with the Kerouacs and the Ginsbergs, and he kind of he went on this other path, which was quite unassuming, and he kind of became a woodsman, and kind of like this play actually. And he kind of went, I want to practically be doing something, and he became a woodcutter and a woodmaker, and he lived in a forest and did that. He was interested in literature, so I think he learned Chinese, and he translated a lot of very old poets, fully acknowledging that some of the greatest ideas we can have come before us. They're not from us. They exist already, and it's for us to find them and eat them up. And I think he's so well-rounded and so not about him. He's about well, this one poem, After Work, is just beautiful. I love it very much. So he would be it.
Great. When we look at those old, like This Girl Laughs, This Girl Cries, This Girl Does Nothing, it is a contemporary take on one of those old fables. Those fables that were like Hansel and Gretel abandoned in the woods by the woodcutter father, and they come to the gingerbread house, blah blah blah. But what is it about those stories that have passed the test of time, that are constantly being told and being told and being told? What is it about those, do you think, that make them such classics?
I think they are allegories.
They don't date.
No, you're right, and they all seem to have those similar elements, which is the hero's story, or the hero's journey, essentially. That thing which sits at the base of Star Wars and Harry Potter, and pretty much every story from any period of time that we can choose to scrutinise. The protagonist who considers themselves to be very normal. They can't have ego, otherwise we won't invest in them. We won't give enough of a shit to will them to succeed. So quite unassuming of themselves, and in a situation which they've got some kind of pressure placed upon them. They aren't reaching their full potential because of something. They're impeded in some way. We have a sense they might be great, but they definitely don't. And then something happens, an effect occurs, which causes them to suddenly be forced to be the one who will save the day for themselves or for others. Usually they can't make that decision themselves. Like, it's got to be something that happens to them which causes them to prove themselves great. They go through a series of tasks or obstacles which show them to be attaining wisdom, or kind of proving themselves to be a bit more wonderful. They have a penultimate dip where there's tragedy and they sacrifice themselves. So they give up, and in that moment of giving up, they discover redemption. And from there they can truly succeed, and they vanquish the dragon, or they do what needs to be done. And it sits, I think, below what pretty much most fairy tales I've read. And it's just concise, and because it's of a time which, that 1820s Grimsian era, I don't know, it does something to us. And because it's something that parents have read to children for 200 years since, it taps us back into a place where we're lying in bed and being read that story. And yeah, I don't know, it ticks all those boxes. Yeah, that's right. And it's just encapsulated so nicely in those stories. I don't think that that suggests that that's all the stories that need to be written about it, and of course Star Wars and Harry Potter proves that, to be the case. That we need it, the circumstances can change, the gender can change of that protagonist, it can be in space, it can be in Hogwarts, that's cool. But yeah, still those kind of steps are happening. And
was there a particular story when you were small that it's always stayed with you, that you loved? For me, one of them is A Fish Out of Water. With Dr. Carp. So this boy has a fish, and Dr. Carp says, "Do not feed your fish. Only feed him that much. Any more than that, you're in trouble."
Yeah.
But the boy goes, "Oh, no, I'll give him a bit more. I'll give him a bit more." And this fish just grows. He goes out of his bowl, so he's got to take him to the kitchen sink. He goes out of the kitchen sink, so he has to take him to the basement, fill the basement. And he's got to take him to the... It was so stressful to read. I couldn't stop reading, and I used to get just going, "Oh, the fish is getting bigger." And at what bigger body of water can you get than a pool? Because for me, that was, you know, and it was so strange, but I loved it. There was something about that I couldn't wait to pick up that book and read it again. You know, and then, was there a book for you that's...
I want to read that one now. That's
sure, it's here.
I want to write that one, actually. Emil and the Detectives is by Eric Kessner, this German children's story, which is really fantastic, about a boy who's got to carry money on a train. The money gets stolen by a pickpocket. He amasses this tribe of children, and together they go to save the day. Parents are nothing to do with it aside from being villains, and it's to the kids to solve the problem. It's great. I remember really loving that. Maurice Sendak I've loved since then to now, and I have a tattoo of him, and so I've proved it with ink. And so yeah, his stories are great. And
it is a wonderful moment in Where the Wild Things Are, which is another favourite of mine, when that room turns into a forest, and watching the process of the bedding turning into palm trees is incredible.
And it is a known thing, you know, from a child's perception, that, I don't know, that ability, and for me, reading a novel as an adult, you know, that moment where it really kicks in. It's lovely to say within a library, this is the magic of this place. You know, the moment where it shifts and you are not here in a chair reading it, you are there, and you are wholly engulfed, you know, and that is that's a known thing to all of us still, I think, which is great.
And if there was a book you wish you'd written, what would it be?
I think my favourite is Cannery Road by John Steinbeck. To have written it, but also to have lived it, which is the harder one, I think. Yeah, that's just perfect. The life of just kind of all these people and a community which knows itself so well and knows of its individual parts, those people, but its collective importance because of how they affect each other's lives. That is just such a well documented, I think, charting of all these stories that I can't really floor it.
Have you ever been criticised for going too far with your work in terms of themes that you're saying?
Taboo-y kind of stuff or whatever?
The taboo-y kind of stuff. Which would be a great title for the next play. The taboo-y kind of stuff.
No parents would take their kids to that. I don't think so, actually. No, because I acknowledge the parents or the buyer inner's predicament. I really always try to, and so I won't put the hard, like if there is some issue which is you know, they're a bit worried about their children going through, that won't be at the front of the work at all, and I won't even try to write about that. I don't think. I very rarely do. I don't like really writing about tangible, three-dimensional, real things. So you go, there's the real thing. Because I know if I'm in a piece of theatre and they go, this theatre is about this issue, I switch off from that issue. I'm like, don't try to do this to me. I'm here for theatre. You have to be more clever. You have to kind of lure me in or make me think about that peripherally. And so I try to do that with my works as well.
So when you write, who do you write for?
It sounds so twee and stupid, but I just write the story. I forget about the for a bit. Later on in the editing process, I completely consider how the audience would be doing at this point and if I'd be losing them and put them back at the front of the work, because it has to be, you know, that's the joy of theatre. It's about the audience taking it in, ultimately. That's what it is. But when I'm writing it, in that first telling, no, it's just got to be about where the story needs to go.
It's amazing because Sean Tance has a similar thing about he never intended to write for children or young people. He just painted and then added dialogue, and for everyone. He never actually had children or young people in his mind. That's his biggest market. Although there are an incredible amount of adults that also love his books and buy his artwork. It's amazing. When you've worked a lot overseas, a lot in Europe, and your plays have been commissioned and produced overseas, particularly in Europe and in the States and in the UK. What's the difference between theatre for young people in Australia and theatre for young people, let's say Europe for a moment?
Yeah, okay. Europe is in itself, you know, a very large landmass with a lot of different cultures sitting side by side, sometimes amicably and sometimes not. And I think you could see that kind of in the notions of what children can deal with. It's a question which, within our industry, just, you know, is constantly discussed. And yeah,
you mean what they've been exposed to
and kind of what you would present to a child audience, you know, what they can deal with and where we're willing to go. And I think Australia sits really nicely, actually. I think it's in a really good place. It's kind of brave enough to say, no, thematically we'll go where we need to go, where the story needs to go, and where emotionally a child audience might need to go. Kind of it might be good for them to go there. But it's, I don't know, it's not completely unabashed, and it doesn't just throw full-on subject matter around to be full-on. I kind of like that it's, I think the work coming out of here I find to be generally quite well crafted. I really enjoy that, which is not to say that
coming out of Australia well crafted.
Yeah. And then of course lots of my heroes are companies from Theatre Artemis, Compagnia Odisseo, Suzanne Lebeau's work in Quebec.
What is it about those companies that you like? What is it that you...
I was excited sitting in the audience. They didn't seem to mind that I wasn't a kid. They still created work that I was wholly there. And that was, you know, Theatre Fellow in France. Yeah, they didn't seem to make that thing about age and go, okay, from this point you can access it, and at this age, stop, sorry. You know, just take your kids along and then leave. They just made good theatre. And I think that's at the core of all the work that we all attempt to do. Just make good theatre, you know. And if it's good, then it'll go down well. You know, and I've been lucky enough to see it with some works and not see it with some others of mine, you know, like, you know, it's a struggle and you have to work on it. It shouldn't be easy. But when it works, then those kind of demographics don't matter.
Yeah, I went and saw Brave. Who's seen Brave here? Pixar film. I think Pixar are amazing because they just have the right ingredients for film, because it is for children but it's also for adults. And every single one of their films I've seen, they never fail for me.
Yeah.
And you turn up to the cinema and you have a look, and it's a mixture of grandparents and parents and children and you know, young adults, and it's you know, and I think there is also a bravery, using a good word, attached to it, that they're not scared to explore things. Like in Toy Story 3, when the toys are all heading down to the inferno and they're about to burn, they'll hold hands. Just go, okay, this is quite intense. You know, but somehow they get away with it. They do it beautifully.
Yeah.
And I
because who would question that? I mean, that does work, you know, as a motif, as a visual moment. That is hugely compelling, you know, and it's not for an adult or a child or anybody to contest that it's not. I mean, it definitely is, and they do that. They make very good art. Yeah.
If there's one thing you could change in theatre for young people in Australia, what would it be? It's big, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's time. It's really putting pressure on. Is there something when you go and watch theatre for young people, like in Australia, is there something that you wish would change or you would like to see differently? Or it could be the government giving us more money. I don't know.
I mean, I'm really, I think, in a bit of a bubble, in a way, which you are not, in that I get commissioned as an artist, so the financial aspects of it and everything, I feel quite guilty saying this. I'm not so privy, you know, I know that the arts needs more money and stuff like that, but in terms of the specific machinations of what this budget cut means for these companies, I don't know. So I would say that, absolutely yes, but not with an authority that means anybody should care that I've said it. And for me, the issue with this country is geography. I think I miss out on so much work because I'm on an island that I love incredibly, which is off an island that I love incredibly. But you know, the sheer pragmatic distances mean that I miss being inspired sometimes, and I can see it within my population. And I mean, maybe it's an equivalent discussion to having the most isolated city in the world.
It's really interesting, actually, because yes, and coming from Sydney, I grew up in Melbourne, and then I worked there, and I worked in Sydney before I came here. So I've always lived in over in the east in those two cities where there's so much art and theatre. Not as much as overseas, but there is a lot. And then you come here, and I understand the isolation of being here nearly 2 years now. But there's something wonderful about that isolation for me too, that allows me to have such a very rich creative process where I'm not distracted or looking left or looking right. I can focus on the work, and it's wonderful. However, I do miss being inspired and being able to go, seeing 3 or 4 shows a week.
And even if it's just a precursor thing, you had that period of time where you were fed in that way. And now maybe this is the point of distillation, and this is the point where you can be harnessing those disparate thoughts which would have been lost in the mass potentially. And you can be creating, this is it seems a beautiful creating space.
Is that what you have in Tasmania?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what keeps you there and what you love about it.
Yeah, and once or twice a year I go overseas, and every couple of months I go interstate, and I'm really lucky in that way, and I get fed, and I get excited, and I steal ideas. But I see work that inspires me, or I see work that doesn't at all inspire me, and I get fed by that and go, never making that one.
Of course, because that's just what it's saying.
Completely. And then Hobart is the space of making, and I see work there. Of course, people in Hobart are making work, but it's not as much. And you're right. There's the gaps in between where you can focus on the putting out of your craft as opposed to just the taking in. But I still think there are places, Hobart being one, here I hypothesise could be another, where sometimes you miss the seeing work arrive, and just an idea you would never have thought of, or you hear the fanfare of it approaching and go, this work's about to be important because it's come from that place, and that's not the right preparation. Sometimes you just want to be surprised. Go to a show without any expectation and go, oh, and that one just broke my heart, and that's a beautiful experience.
Great. Look, I might open it up to the audience and give them a chance to ask you a few questions. I've waffled on quite a bit. Yes.
Yeah. I just wondered in terms of your name. Sounds obviously Finegan was the Irish one, which I can identify with. But the other part of the name, is that Dutch?
It's Deutsch.
German.
Yes.
So from the Irish-German connection, are there little aspects of theatre or literature from either of those cultures that particularly stood out for you, or a mixture?
Not to my knowledge, and I think that's the important thing. If they are there, then I don't know them, because otherwise I think I might be a bit too reverential about it. Oh, this is an Irish idea forming, I better treat it in this way. Or, this I can trace back to its German lineage. And so I like that culturally I come from a very disparate place. There's English in there too, my mum's English, and we live in Australia, which is another thing, and I see work from other countries, and I think that all gets put into the pool, and then the stories that emerge are the stories that emerge. And I quite like that I can't attach them to a specific culture, because that means that, and I've been lucky enough to see it when some of my shows travel out from this point at which I've written them, they're as accessible in one culture as they are in another. And I would wholly attribute that to any work I've ever done, that it's not like this show arrives at that country and they all go, we don't get it. Emotional understanding is completely across the board, I believe. So I hope that's good.
I've heard 2 novelists speak lately about their craft. First said she had to know exactly how the thing was planning out from start to finish before she could write something. And the other said, well, I have this character, and the character keeps telling me what to do, and I have no idea what's going to happen until it happens. Where do you stand in this? The
latter. These days, because I write to commission and I'm in a nice place where people are saying we're interested in a commission, but what have you got? I start off writing little treatments and I show those to the company, so I have some little notion of what the story might be about in a way, but I didn't even used to have that. I used to just sit down and just start writing and let it form in that way. So now I have this little semi-formed idea, but in terms of what I do, I sit down, my general process tends to be I write about the protagonist. I see who turns up first, I write about them, I get a sense of who they are, generally in a big fat monologue, which doesn't make it into the play, but it serves its purpose because it introduced me to them and it was that conduit. I then say, if this is the person that I'm getting to know, who might be their antagonist, who might they not want in their life or have some issue with, because conflict is at the centre of most drama. So then I find out about that person, then I build out the community and go who else might be in their lives, and I build out in that way, and then I build the landscape and say, where is all this happening? Once I've gauged a sense of all that, I can look back at the protagonist and say what would be most important to them, and if they were to lose it, what would be most tragic, and you know, if they could have anything, what would they grab, and all those kind of questions. Form a narrative from there, and then I sit down and I write scene 1. And after I've written scene 1, I write scene 2, and I just go like that, and it unveils itself as I go. And one day I write the end, and I send it off to people and go, there's a first draft, and it's usually pretty wonky. And then they give their notes, I give my notes, and I neat and tidy, neat and tidy, neat and tidy.
How many drafts would you do in a play? I mean, does it differ for each play, or is it?
Yeah, the Tragical Life of Cheese Boy was 1 draft, so that was pretty much just written.
So it was very clear in your...
Yeah, there were small variations made, but essentially that thing dropped out. This one was 1 draft. This was just 1 draft. Yeah, and it's been a while since a 1 draft has turned up, so that's pretty. I didn't realise that. And some have been so many drafts, and I just wanted to punch them in the face. Have been horrible.
Okay, use your words.
Sorry.
I was lucky enough to, a few years ago, to work with Ed Goldie in New York. And I spent 8 weeks with him gravitating on his new play, Me, Myself and I. He is incredible because he'll only write 1 draft. All his plays, 1 draft. And
so he knows it when he comes into it.
He will spend 3 to 4 years walking around with these characters in his head. And he'll develop the characters and develop the characters and develop the situation. And then he'll make the characters argue. He'll put them in situations. And he'll argue and he'll challenge them and he'll make them fall in love and he'll make them separate and then... but it's all going on in his head. And then he doesn't know when it will arrive, but the day arrives and he'll go, bang, that's it, I'm ready. And then he'll write. And it's 1 draft. And the thing that will change from there is a comma, a full stop, where I'll take out that word and I'll just put that there, but that really is it. It's like surgery. It's the most fascinating thing to watch.
Yes.
Do you have that with your characters in your head?
In terms of knowing them implicitly.
Yeah, when you start developing a play, do you have the characters already there? Do you let them talk? Do you?
Yeah, I have.
Is it all on paper for you? Is it?
I'm really. I don't do the walking around and the hypothesising in that way. Like I'm really structural in that sense that I sit at a computer for 8 hours a day during the weekdays, and I work like that. You know, so I'm very unfun and. You know, the idea of an artist at the 3 in the morning, oh my god, that's it. I don't do that. I put on the kettle and you know, I listen to some music I like and then I do it that way. So no, I don't have that bravery. I wouldn't say that sounds inherently. I'm sure he's got 20 drafts hidden away that he doesn't show you before he pretends to write that one.
I didn't wonder if he was selling a pork pie, but I thought, no, I'm not going to argue with Ed at all. Take that. I believe you there.
But yeah, no, I can't. If that happens, then it's a surprise for me.
Yeah.
I don't possess that bravery to go. This will be written in 1 draft. I think that's huge. That's amazing.
It will be. Karen Warbanks down the back. You have your hand up.
I just wanted to ask Karen, outside of the story and the journey of the protagonist, do you ever think specifically about just words and the sound of them? Because when I read This Girl, it just seemed like it was such a celebration of sounds and words as well as this epic story, and and then a collection of words together that form to this beautiful, lyrical kind of almost melody. Do you ever think consciously about that when you're writing? Or
That's
just
all I think about so often. Oh my God, like I love it. I give my life, as Essie knows, to cryptic crosswords and anagrams. And I wrote a play called Helena and the Journey of the Hello about Helena Bogosi, and her name is anagrammaticized throughout the show, over and over again in all these variations, and that's a complete pleasure. And when I rewrote the Brecht piece, Drums in the Night, he was so much about this is the statement, this is what I want you to know, this is the lesson I want, the thing that I want us all to feel and share and be affected by. And I chose to bastardize that by going, I just want to think about the sounds and the wordplay and do this really indulgent kind of language game. And I love that so much. So yeah.
Have you always loved words?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a joy, like to find it so young, to know that that's the thing, and then I would write anyway, absolutely, and at some point in my life I probably will, like if this all finishes, which is lovely right now, but that will always be there, completely.
How do you stop? How do you let a script go? What's the end point?
This is kind of what you were posing at the start about the nature of a commissioned writer. Because for 10 years, essentially that's all that I've known, I get help with that. And so a producer says, that's done, we're happy with that, that's enough drafts. Those dots and commas, they inform some of that. The jumps between first and second draft is always a really big one, that gap, and usually I go into a room and have a creative development with the actors, designers, composers, so they feed into that. Ultimately I choose what ideas I'll take on and what I'll throw away, and I do all the writing because I'm the writer and I want to be able to sign off on that. But yeah, those are all things that have been kind of discussed as a negotiation. And that's good, I think, for me, because it's really taught me the value of an audience, because a producer is wholly aware of the audience. They're not just about the art as a thing, which is wholly deserving of its own life. They're like, no, who is going to appreciate this and in what way? Great. So I've become so privy to that. I'm a bit scared of what you talked about, because I'm just embarking now on a period, kind of a sabbatical, where I'm stepping away from commissions for a while, and I'm finding out what I would write where I left to my own devices. And it's your thing. I'm scared that I'll never stop. Like this one story which everyone would hate. It's just about one guy picking up a toothbrush, but it goes for 400 pages.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Commission.
We'll talk. Right in front of everyone here. Are there any other questions? Yes, gentleman in the brown t-shirt.
I sense a lot of the people here tonight are probably budding writers of their own kind, and you're a bit of a role model for them. And if the question goes back to right at the beginning of our conversation, and you reflect on your early childhood and how that was fundamental for the way that you've been quite creative. But being born in a stable doesn't make you a horse. So a lot of these people here would probably be reading theorists and all that sort of thing to try and get a fundamentals on where they need to be. Is there one book that you had read that turned your, the structure and how you developed your characterizations and stuff like that? Is there something?
There isn't.
Because we need to get it in the library.
Yeah.
Yeah, fish out of water.
Yeah.
Do you mean like a book about the craft of writing, or like a novel that exemplifies good practice?
Well, possibly, but it's sort of like, as I said, with the theorists and that sort of thing. A lot of people go down that path looking for elements in which that could help them create their own signature.
I know it's such a handball, and I'm sorry to do that, but I think even if I knew what that book was, I would be reticent to tell it, because I found that when I was kind of in the really formative stage, my first commissions as a writer, and when I was really, I hope I still am open, but really, you know, what would one do? People gave me lists of books to read and everything, and I started to kind of go, those books were so important for them at that stage, and that's magic. And now the thing, if I were to be asked to do it, would be to let somebody loose in here, you know, and just see what is the book that breaks open your head, and then go, yes, that is the way that I am conditioned to writing, and that innately, you know, this is a conversation I can have and know implicitly, and that thing of how, you know, my early years informed anything, I think, and I've said this before, but yeah, autobiography is a great starting place for a creative outpouring, but then it's pretty important to take yourself out of it, I really find, because it can impede how an audience receives it.
But in those early stages, you're right, it is important, because that's what you can draw on.
Definitely, completely. Just as long as you can be objective. Objectivity, I think, is the great craft of the writers I love, you know, and to be able, even if they were writing about themselves, like Marguerite Duras, you know, she seems to write with such an amazing distance that she becomes a subject just as everything else is a subject so well, and it's amazing. So yeah, let loose in libraries. I think that's my belief, for what it's worth.
On that note, we might wrap it up. Again, thank you Subiaco Library, and thank you Finegan Kruckemeyer for your time, and also to the three ladies in the front row here who were quite disruptive to begin with, but have been very well behaved. So thank you very much.